USAID staff is being told to shred and burn all their classified documents. Quote, the U.S. Agency for International Development is instructing its staff in Washington.
A shocking video is going viral. It shows USAID officials burning what appears to be sensitive documents. Many people are furious, with some questioning the transparency of the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID.
When you look at USAID, that's a fraud. The whole thing is a fraud.
For years, USAID has faced accusations of secrecy and mismanagement. But this particular incident is raising a serious question. If USAID is as transparent as they claim, why would their own members destroy evidence? Join us as we break down this footage, explore its implications, and delve into the deeper secrets behind USAID's operations.
Let's be clear, they're dismantling USAID. They shut down the doors, they brought down banners.
Unraveling the controversy. At first, the viral video of USAID members burning documents looked like just another government office, getting rid of old paperwork before moving out. But then the details started to come out. There was an internal email from a top official. The email told employees to destroy some specific documents before relocating. And these weren't just random office files. Some were taken straight from classified safes, while others contained sensitive personnel records. The moment that footage of people burning these documents started making the rounds, people could not but ask what was being covered up.
We will not stand for anything less than USAID fully functioning and supporting our government.
And you know, if a major government agency was caught destroying potential evidence, the media would be all over it. News anchors would be debating it, reporters would be digging for answers, and government officials would be rushing to explain. But this time, it was different. The biggest media outlets barely touched the story. CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they either ignored it completely or gave it just a passing mention. But why is this so? And what were they trying so desperately to hide? You will want to keep watching this video because the truth will leave you speechless. This isn't the first time USAID has been at the center of a controversy like this. The agency is supposed to help struggling countries with aid and development, but over the years, concerns about how USAID handles its funding have been growing. Every year, billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars are sent to foreign countries through the agency.
That's right. So the administration canceled all of this money in foreign assistance.
Supporters argue that this money helps struggling nations, but critics have never stopped pointing out that much of it is wasted, mismanaged, or even used for political influence. This has led to frustration among Americans, especially as they deal with rising inflation, high healthcare costs, and crippling student debt. Former Congressman Ron Paul, for example, has been one of USAID's most vocal critics. He argues that the agency should not be funded by taxpayers at all. Instead, he believes it should rely on private donations, just like other charities. According to Paul, if people truly care about helping other nations, they should voluntarily contribute, rather than being forced to pay through their taxes. He has repeatedly called for USAID to be shut down or drastically reformed, but so far, nothing has changed. Even Elon Musk has been making headlines lately, but this time, it is not about Tesla or SpaceX.
We don't have a fourth branch of government called Elon Musk, and that's going to become real clear.
Reports claim that his team has uncovered hidden records suggesting that USAID has been misusing taxpayer money for years. According to sources, Musk investigators allegedly found that the agency operates beyond its intended purpose, engaging in activities that have little to do with humanitarian aid. His team reportedly traced millions of dollars funneled into programs that had no clear oversight. There were documents showing how USAID funded projects that had nothing to do with relief efforts, raising concerns about where the money was really going. With growing accusations, leaked documents, and even billionaires like Musk reportedly digging into USAID's records, the pressure on the agency is mounting. This explains why the USAID has become a major target of the Trump administration, which accuses the agency of reckless spending and corruption. And some of the programs that came under fire were not those that you'd expect. There was $1.5 million spent to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, in Serbia's workplaces, $2.5 million used to install electric vehicle chargers in Vietnam, and $6 million poured into tourism promotion in Egypt. But maybe the most controversial was the program meant to stop Afghan farmers from growing poppies, which are used to make opium.
a veritable sea of opium poppies. This is Afghanistan, which now produces more than 3/4 of the world's heroin.
The plan was to offer farmers alternative crops to grow instead of poppies. But instead of solving the problem, the program reportedly helped poppy production expand, with some even saying that the funding ended up indirectly benefiting the Taliban. Of course, not all of these allegations are true. Some are exaggerated, and fact-checkers have debunked many parts of the accusations. But the damage has already been done. The backlash has been intense, and USAID is completely gutted. The agency, which once had over 10,000 employees, is slashed down to fewer than 300. Some call it a necessary move to cut government waste. Others think it is a disaster, warning that pulling USAID's support would leave millions of vulnerable people without help. As it stands, President Trump wants to merge USAID with the State Department for better oversight. According to insiders, the move is supposed to prevent wasteful spending and make sure foreign aid actually serves U.S. interests. But critics aren't buying it. They argue that this isn't about efficiency, it's about control.
We are going to fight in every way we can, in the courts, in public opinion.
For years, USAID has operated somewhat independently, deciding how to distribute aid without direct interference from the State Department. But if the merger happens, that changes. It means the U.S. government can use aid as a bargaining chip, tying humanitarian assistance to political favors. Do you need emergency food supplies? Maybe the United States will provide them, but only if your country aligns with U.S. policies. Are you seeking help rebuilding after a disaster? That assistance might depend on who's in charge of your government. Some believe this has been the plan all along. First, you gut the agency. Then, when it's too weak to fight back, you roll it into the State Department. And once that happens, USAID's original mission, which is helping people in crisis, could take a backseat to diplomacy and foreign policy strategies. But then there's another concern. If USAID becomes part of the State Department, it also means that classified diplomatic information could start flowing through the agency. That raises serious questions about transparency. Would future USAID operations be shielded under diplomatic secrecy? Would it become harder to track where aid money is actually going? Now, some of the biggest defense contractors have been pushing for this merger behind the scenes. Why? Because a lot of USAID contracts already go to private companies that provide security, logistics, and even intelligence support in foreign countries. If USAID is absorbed into the State Department, these contracts could expand, turning foreign aid into just another tool of U.S. geopolitical strategy. Meanwhile, the few USAID employees left are scrambling.
The U.S. Agency for International Development say the organization can no longer track billions of dollars.
The agency is barely holding on. Projects are shutting down, and international partners are worried about what happens next. And with the viral video of USAID members burning documents still fresh in people's minds, the timing of all this feels suspicious. That's not all. After President Trump's administration froze USAID's funding, a federal judge ruled that the move was unlawful. But by that point, the agency was already falling apart. Aid organizations that depended on USAID were scrambling for new funding, and long-running projects were suddenly shut down.
We've heard a lot about the shutdown of the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID.
And that's when the panic started within the agency. As USAID was being dismantled, that email surfaced, ordering employees to destroy classified documents. Shortly after, reports started pouring in about documents being shredded, deleted, and even burned. Then the video surfaced, confirming everyone's worst fears. And the moment that footage hit the internet, the reaction was immediate. People wanted to know what was in those files. If USAID was supposed to be a transparent agency, why were they acting like they had something to hide? Keep watching, because what we'll reveal next will change everything you think you knew about this. A historical context. Time and time again, USAID has been at the center of massive financial aid efforts. Yet billions of dollars have vanished without a trace. If history is any guide, this isn't the first time important records tied to the agency have mysteriously disappeared. Take Haiti in 2010, for example. After a catastrophic earthquake devastated the country, the U.S. pledged billions of dollars in aid, much of it funneled through USAID. The money was meant to rebuild infrastructure, provide emergency housing, and support economic recovery. But as years passed, very little of that aid translated into real improvements on the ground. Investigative reports revealed that while contracts had been issued and funds had been allocated, Projects were left incomplete, homes were never built, and there was little accountability for how the money was actually spent. When watchdog groups attempted to follow the money trail, they found missing or incomplete records. Some funds went to companies that never delivered on their promises. Other money simply vanished. In the end, the people of Haiti were left wondering why, despite billions in foreign aid, their country was still in ruins. Then there is Afghanistan, a country where USAID has been heavily involved since the early 2000s. After the U.S. invasion in 2001, USAID poured billions into reconstruction efforts. But much of that money was lost due to corruption, mismanagement, and fraud. Investigations found that hundreds of millions of dollars had been wasted on unfinished projects. And the interesting part, in both 2019 and 2023, while the U.S. economy was struggling, USAID still sent millions of dollars to Afghanistan. Now you'd think that with all the past scandals and mismanagement, there would be strict oversight, right? Well, that wasn't the case. Instead, much of that money reportedly disappeared into thin air, with little to no accountability. The problem wasn't just about funds being sent, it was about where those funds actually ended up. In 2019, a major chunk of USAID money was meant to help Afghanistan's struggling economy and support rebuilding efforts.
The US has announced $308 million in new humanitarian assistance to help ease an urgent food and healthcare crisis in Taliban-led.
But reports later suggested that a significant portion of those funds were either mismanaged or siphoned off through corrupt networks. Some of the money was funneled into projects that were never completed, while other portions ended up in the hands of Afghan officials who had ties to questionable groups. Then in 2023, the same mistakes seemed to happen all over again. The U.S. had already pulled out of Afghanistan, and yet USAID continued to send millions in aid. By this time, the Taliban had taken full control of the country, which raised a very serious concern. Was U.S. taxpayer money somehow ending up in the hands of the Taliban? Whistleblowers claimed that some of the funds meant for humanitarian aid were being controlled by groups affiliated with the Taliban. And instead of helping Afghan civilians, the money was reportedly being used for purposes that had nothing to do with aid. People began asking, why was the U.S. still sending money when it had no real control over where it went? Why was USAID operating in a way that seemed reckless, especially after years of similar issues? The lack of transparency only made things worse. Every time someone tried to trace where the money had gone, the answers were vague. Some officials claimed the money was being used for food and medical aid, but when reporters tried to verify that, they found little evidence to support those claims. And that brings us back to the bigger issue. If USAID has a pattern of losing money and failing to keep track of its own spending, then what does that say about its current operations? Is the same thing happening in other parts of the world right now? If documents are being burned and records are disappearing, what else is being hidden? A case in point is Ukraine, another country where USAID's involvement has raised questions.
Your money is not charity. It's an investment in the global security.
Since 2014, the U.S. has committed billions in aid to Ukraine, with much of it passing through USAID. However, even as the war escalated in 2022, and even more funds were allocated, lawmakers and journalists struggled to get clear answers on exactly where that money was going. Unlike the usual aid efforts, which have clear oversight and tracking systems, much of the aid to Ukraine remained vaguely accounted for. Some reports suggested that a significant portion of the funds had been lost in bureaucratic inefficiencies, while others believed that USAID was being used as a financial pass-through for efforts that extended beyond humanitarian relief. This lack of transparency only fueled more suspicion. And it's not just about financial mismanagement. USAID has also been accused of using aid programs as a cover for secret operations. There have been instances where money sent through USAID allegedly ended up in the hands of warlords, corrupt politicians, and even militant groups that later turned against the U.S. Over the years, multiple reports have suggested that USAID was involved in efforts to influence political outcomes in foreign countries under the guise of humanitarian aid. These claims have never been fully proven, but they have been enough to raise serious doubts about the agency's true purpose. The deeper one looks into USAID's past, the more unanswered questions one seems to get. And now, with new leaks and whistleblower reports, it feels like this story is only getting started. This isn't just about one mistake. It's about a pattern, a long history of mismanagement, secrecy, and missing money. And with more eyes now watching, the real question is, what will be exposed next? Keep watching because this story is far from over. What are they really hiding? On February 3, 2025, Elon Musk made a claim that sent shockwaves through social media. He suggested that USAID had, at some point, funded scientific research that actually made harmful viruses and bacteria stronger instead of stopping them. His argument? That some of the taxpayer money sent through USAID went to labs conducting risky experiments, ones that could have accidentally or even knowingly led to the development of more resistant and dangerous germs. The idea itself wasn't entirely new. Over the years, there have been concerns about U.S. funding going toward questionable research in foreign labs. Some people pointed to past reports of grants being given to labs studying how viruses evolve. But Musk's claim took things a step further. He suggested that USAID was involved in something much bigger than just funding routine scientific studies, that their money may have played a role in dangerous research that had unintended consequences. Almost immediately, major news outlets dismissed the claim. Headlines popped up saying there was no evidence to support it. Fact-checkers jumped in, labeling the statement as misleading. The general consensus among mainstream media was that Musk was spreading conspiracy theories without proof. But that didn't stop the internet from digging deeper. People started asking questions. If USAID has such a long history of mismanaged funds, could it be possible that money was given to research projects without proper oversight? Had any of those projects been connected to experiments that, instead of preventing diseases, might have made them worse? There was an immediate answer, but the fact that the topic was shut down so quickly by the media only fueled more curiosity.
To make sure that we uphold the rule of law, stop this illegal shutdown of AID.
Musk himself didn't back down. He continued hinting at his claim, suggesting that certain labs had received U.S. funding through USAID and that more details would eventually come to light. It remains to be seen whether or not that would happen, but this wasn't a conversation that was going away anytime soon. Now, if Elon Musk's claim wasn't enough to raise eyebrows, another long-standing concern is USAID's alleged influence over media narratives in the countries it funds. And we're not just talking about small-scale influence. Some reports suggest that in places like Ukraine, Afghanistan, and Haiti, USAID-backed media outlets rarely, if ever, criticize the agency or question where the billions of dollars in funding actually go. Take Ukraine, for example. Since 2014, USAID has poured billions into the country, funding everything from democratic institutions to infrastructure. But if you look at Ukrainian media, there's little to no serious reporting about financial mismanagement within these projects. In 2023, independent reporters tried to investigate missing USAID funds that were supposed to help rebuild war-torn regions, but those stories barely saw the light of day. Their efforts were met with significant challenges, including restricted access to information and a lack of cooperation from involved parties. These obstacles hindered their ability to provide a comprehensive account of the alleged misuse of aid funds. For instance, in Ethiopia, a USAID investigation uncovered large-scale diversion of food aid, with both the Ethiopian and Tigrayan armies reportedly misusing donor-funded assistance. Photographic evidence showed mills filled with aid supplies, and interviews suggested that military forces were benefiting from resources meant for civilians. Similarly, in Nigeria, the Global Fund's Office of the Inspector General reported a multi-million-dollar fraud involving a USAID subcontractor. The Nigerian haulage company Zenith Carex allegedly inflated invoices, defrauding grant programs of $3 million. Inadequate financial monitoring by Comonix, the primary contractor, was cited as a contributing factor. It's a similar pattern in Afghanistan. The U.S. spent over $145 billion on reconstruction efforts there.
This man with billions of dollars of investment, and it can only be disbanded by an act of Congress.
With USAID playing a major role. Yet despite reports of widespread corruption, Afghan media, heavily funded by Western organizations, rarely exposed these issues while the U.S. military was present. When the Taliban took over in 2021, suddenly reports of disappeared funds and mismanaged aid started coming out. But by then, it was too late. The money was gone, and nobody was held accountable. Haiti is another striking example. After the devastating earthquake in 2010, USAID promised billions to rebuild the country. Yet more than a decade later, much of that money is unaccounted for. This brings us to a bigger question. If USAID can shape media narratives in other countries, how much of what we hear in our own news is filtered through that same lens? Major U.S. media outlets like CNN, the New York Times, and the Washington Post frequently report on USAID's activities, but how often do they seriously investigate where the money's going? When was the last time you saw a deep dive expose on potential USAID corruption from these outlets? There have even been claims that journalists working in USAID-backed countries face pressure to stick to a certain narrative. In 2022, a group of Afghan reporters alleged that they were encouraged to write positive stories about USAID projects in exchange for grants and access to exclusive events. While this might not seem like outright media control, it raises ethical concerns, especially if critical stories are quietly discouraged. So, putting this into perspective, the viral video of USAID staff burning documents, the agency's history of missing funds, Musk's claim about dangerous research, and now the possibility of media manipulation, it all suggests there's a much bigger story here. Keep watching, because there's still more to uncover: the hidden hand in global politics. Now, if shaping media narratives wasn't concerning enough, political meddling is another accusation that's been following USAID for years. And we're not just talking about funding schools, hospitals, or roads. Critics argue that USAID has been used as a tool to push some political agendas, sometimes even helping to overthrow governments that don't align with U.S. interests. Let's start with Georgia. In 2003, the country experienced what's now called the Rose Revolution. The sitting president, Eduard Shevardnadze, was forced to step down after weeks of protests.
People in Georgia have also been ringing in protests in the capital, Tbilisi.
But here's the part that raises eyebrows. Several groups that played a key role in organizing those protests were reportedly funded by USAID. One of them was the Liberty Institute, which received financial support from USAID in the years leading up to the revolution. Then just 5 years later, in 2008, tensions with Russia exploded into war after Georgia's newly elected pro-Western president, Mikhail Saakashvili, tried to reclaim two separatist regions. Critics argue that USAID's support for these groups wasn't just about promoting democracy, but about ensuring Georgia aligned more closely with the West, regardless of the consequences. And the consequences were serious. The war with Russia left thousands dead and permanently altered Georgia's relationship with its powerful neighbor. Even today, Russian officials point to USAID's involvement in Georgia as an example of the U.S. using soft power to stir up conflicts near their borders. Then there's Ukraine. If you've been paying attention to global politics, you know how critical this country has become in the fight between the West and Russia. But what many people don't realize is that USAID has been heavily involved in Ukraine for years. In 2014, Ukraine saw its own revolution, the Euromaidan protests, which led to the removal of pro-Russian President Viktor Yanukovych. And guess what? Just like in Georgia, several of the groups that organized those protests had ties to USAID funding. The agency had poured millions into programs that trained activists, supported independent media, and built up pro-Western political organizations. Now, to be clear, supporting democracy isn't a bad thing, but the problem is when a U.S. government agency is seen backing only one side of a political struggle, it raises serious questions. Is this really about democracy, or is it about making sure the right kind of government is in power? After the revolution, USAID didn't stop its involvement. Since then, the agency has funneled billions into Ukraine. Officially, this money is meant for development, anti-corruption efforts, and humanitarian aid. But reports suggest that a significant portion of it has also been used to strengthen Ukraine's military and intelligence services, something that Russia has taken as a direct provocation. And here's where it gets even more concerning. While USAID has been pushing billions into Ukraine, much of that money has gone unaccounted for. Some watchdog groups have tried to investigate where the funds actually end up, but the details remain murky. And if history is any guide, whenever USAID money starts disappearing, it's often a sign that something shady is happening behind the scenes. The bigger question is, how many other countries has USAID influenced in similar ways? How many governments have been quietly pushed aside in favor of leaders more aligned with U.S. interests? And if this is happening on such a large scale, what else is being covered up? First, we had the viral video of USAID officials burning documents. Then we uncovered the agency's media manipulation tactics. Now we're looking at possible political interference in foreign governments. And the story isn't over yet. For years, USAID has presented itself as a force for good, helping struggling nations through financial aid and development projects. But as we've seen, its track record is far from spotless. Allegations of corruption, political interference, and financial mismanagement have raised serious concerns about how the agency operates behind the scenes. Critics argue that too much money disappears without clear oversight, often ending up in the hands of corrupt officials or groups that later turn against U.S. interests. And now, with the viral video of USAID members burning documents,
about shredding and destroying documents, this was not only unethical, but I think illegal.
Many are asking, should foreign aid be handled differently? The reality is, foreign aid has always been a controversial topic. While it's meant to support struggling nations, history has shown that large sums of money rarely reach the people who need it the most. Instead, aid often ends up in the pockets of politicians, warlords, or business elites who manipulate the system for personal gain. One of the biggest issues with USAID is how it distributes funds. The agency primarily works by funneling billions of dollars to foreign governments, trusting them to handle the money responsibly. But time and time again, this approach has led to massive corruption. Once the money lands in government hands, there's little accountability, and it often gets redirected toward personal luxury, military spending, or political agendas. Some critics argue that USAID's model is outdated and that a new approach is needed. One proposed solution is changing how aid money is distributed. Instead of sending massive funds directly to foreign governments, USAID could partner with local NGOs that are already on the ground. These organizations often have better knowledge of what communities actually need and can ensure the money is spent effectively. For example, in countries like Haiti and Sudan, local charities and relief organizations have proven to be far more effective than large government-run programs. When funds are sent directly to trusted NGOs, there's less risk of money being wasted or stolen. But USAID's structure makes it difficult to shift away from government-to-government transactions. Another approach would be enforcing strict spending accountability. This could mean requiring real-time tracking of funds, independent audits, and making financial records fully transparent to the public. If taxpayers are footing the bill, they should know exactly where their money's going. Right now, much of USAID spending is hidden behind bureaucratic red tape. Reports detailing how money is used often take years to surface, if they ever do. And even when audits reveal corruption, the consequences are minimal. The same governments and officials accused of misusing funds often continue receiving aid with no real repercussions. Some have even suggested using blockchain and biometric technology to prevent fraud. Blockchain could create an unchangeable record of every transaction, making it nearly impossible for money to disappear without a trace. Biometrics, like fingerprint or facial recognition, could ensure that aid reaches the right people instead of being siphoned off by middlemen. These technological solutions sound promising, but they also come with their own challenges. Blockchain requires digital infrastructure that many developing nations don't have. Biometric tracking could raise ethical concerns, especially in regions where governments have a history of abusing surveillance technology. Beyond the financial aspect, there's also the question of USAID's political influence. Many believe that the agency's primary function isn't just humanitarian aid, it's a tool for advancing U.S. interests abroad. This is why USAID often prioritizes funding for nations that align with American foreign policy goals while neglecting those that don't. For instance, countries with authoritarian regimes that support U.S. policies have received millions in aid, while others struggling with equal or greater humanitarian crises are overlooked. This selective funding raises doubts about whether USAID's mission is truly about helping people or simply maintaining geopolitical influence. The viral video of USAID officials burning documents has only fueled these suspicions. If everything was being handled transparently, why the need to destroy evidence? Was it related to financial mismanagement, political interference, or something even bigger? Even as the controversy unfolds, USAID remains largely silent. Mainstream media has barely covered the issue, leading many to believe that there's an effort to suppress the story. If the public truly knew how foreign aid was being used, would they still support it? The conversation about USAID's role in the world isn't new, but this latest scandal has reignited the debate. Is it time for a complete overhaul of how foreign aid is handled? Should taxpayer money be used for overseas projects when so many issues exist at home? And if reforms are impossible, is it time to rethink USAID's existence altogether? What do you think? Do you believe this was just routine cleanup, or is there something bigger being covered up? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the following video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.